Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. You may remember that some time ago now we started hearing evidence from Mr. Soanes, one of the architects from Studio E. We had to break off his evidence at that time, but I'm glad to say that we're going to be able to resume it this morning. So could I ask Mr. Soanes to come to the witness box, please? Yes, do sit down, Mr. Soanes. Now, before we begin, I think it's right that I should remind you publicly that you took an oath to tell the truth when you started giving your evidence, and that continues to be the case. You are still on oath, all right? Yes. And the other thing I think I should mention, because a lot of time has passed since you were last here, now you're in the course of giving your evidence, it's very important that you don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else. Right, and that includes Mr. Cushell, who I see is back sitting in the room. So yes. Don't talk to anyone else, either in person or by phone or anything else about your evidence until you've completely finished. All right?
Understood.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, good morning, Mr. Soanes. So when we broke off last time, which was on the 11th of March 2020, we'd started looking at the topic of insulation. The insulation that sat behind the rain screen panels. And we were partway through a detailed consideration of the documents and the chronology and how Celotex FR 5000 came to be in the employer's requirements in the NBS specification. Do you remember?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just pick up where we left off on that topic. And I want to start by looking at an email which is at SEA 404737 at page 2. Yes, so just to orientate yourself within this is an email from Mr. Smith, is it Matt Smith of
yes.
Max Fordham, to you on the 18th of June 2012. And the subject is Grenfell Tower wall build-up. And he says, "Afternoon, Bruce. Do you have an idea on the likely wall cladding build-up yet? What U value are you targeting?" And then he talks about some early indications from the acoustics survey. So he's asking you, what U value are you targeting? Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you agree that it was for Studio E as the lead consultant and the lead designer, Studio E would have all the necessary information to make an assessment as to what the target U value would be?
I knew that the U value target would be governed by Part L.
Yeah.
That I knew.
Yes.
I knew I could look it up.
Yeah.
That's answered your question, I think. The reality is, in most of my experience, and particularly with Max Fordham, which goes back a long way, we tended to look to them to propose a U value.
I see. Yeah. Do you agree in this email he seems to be asking you what U value you are targeting?
Yes.
Yeah. And is that how you understood it at the time, that he was looking to you to give some indication from your perspective as what you were targeting?
Yes, he's asking us. I knew even then, I think, that he had only recently graduated.
Yeah.
So I can understand why he might.
Yes. Would you agree with this, that while a building services engineer like Max Fordham might recommend a U value target, that actually it was ultimately Studio E's responsibility as the architect and lead designer, with all the information that you had, to decide actually what U value was feasible and appropriate on the project?
I think we could have overruled something that was put forward by Max Fordham as the lead designer, yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. We would have to have a good reason not to go with it.
Yes.
In other words, as you say, it would not be feasible. And in that case, yes, we would overrule it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you agree that when you were developing the design to the concept stage, that's RIBA stage C, you'd have had to have considered lots of aspects of the external wall design up to that point?
Yes.
And that would include the type of cladding to use. It would include the depth of the existing walls and the columns, and also the type and thicknesses of the insulation that would sit behind the rain screen. Do you agree that all those kind of factors will feed into the concept design stage?
I think the zone, particularly of the insulation, was the most critical. So
Yeah.
you've described the build-up, which is insulation, cavity, and cladding. The cladding is relatively nominal in terms of build-up, but
Yeah.
the insulation is significant. And on Grenfell Tower, the diamond columns were very significant because they abutted the windows.
Yeah.
So the thickening, offsetting of the cladding from the face of those columns potentially could impact on the windows
Yeah.
sizes. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that particularly the outer rain screen element is very thin.
Relatively.
Then you have a cavity, but then you potentially have quite a thickness of insulation. So that's a key consideration when
Yes.
you're looking at that build-up. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah. Do you agree that Studio E would have to take into consideration a range of factors, including things like the client's budget, the client's overall requirements, the planning requirements, and any technical issues, such as buildability and regulatory compliance, when they were looking at that external wall build-up?
I'd say that's correct. That's the context we're working in.
Yeah. Would you agree that all that information would potentially feed into an assessment of what an appropriate U value should be for the project?
Yes.
And would you agree in that way, and I think you've confirmed it in your earlier answer that you said you could overrule if necessary on a U value. In that way, Studio E was ultimately responsible for coordinating the design strategy as a whole of the external wall?
We were responsible for coordination, yes.
Would you agree that in contrast, the building services engineer might not be aware of certain bits of information that would be relevant to that ultimate choice as to how you build up that wall?
It wouldn't be their interest, but we did discuss things and they were aware of what would happen. They've experienced engineers. I think to say that they wouldn't know is maybe not correct.
But they might not be as familiar as you, for example, with the
Yes.
client's budget requirements and,
They wouldn't be as interested.
Yeah. Can we turn to some minutes from the design team meeting that was held on the 25th of June 2012. This is at SEA 404864. We can see that date at the top there, Monday the 25th of June. And we can see you're there and present as part of that list. And if we can go on to page 2 and look at the final paragraph under services. Yes, so it's at the bottom of that page. It's the final paragraph before acoustics. If we could just blow that up. And if we can just read that paragraph, it says MF, so that's max Fordham, yes?
Yes.
Indicate target U values for walls as 0.15 watts per metre squared Kelvin and 0.22 for windows, subsequently corrected to 1.6. And then it says limiting U values given in part L1B are 0.30 and 1.8 respectively. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So did you read this as Max Fordham saying target U values for the walls were 0.15, but the limiting U value given in part L was actually higher than that? It was 0.30. Is that how you read that at the time and understood that discussion?
I believe I clarified that after the meeting. I think there's an email where I clarified that.
When you say clarified that, what do you mean? Clarified that it was 0.15?
No, that it was 0.13. The limiting value was 0.3, sorry. And 1 point, in other words, what the upper bound we needed to work to was.
What, that it wasn't that? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is at the meeting, the 0.15 figure was put forward.
Yeah.
And I, either at the meeting or after, sought clarification as to what the limit would be under Part L.
I see. And does that mean that the parts in brackets went in after the meeting?
Well, obviously, I
As a result of that.
I obviously wrote the minutes after the meeting, but
Yeah.
I can't recall when I clarified it
I see.
with Max Fordham.
Did you have any thoughts at the time about the appropriateness of that U value as a target figure? Did that say anything to you in terms of how ambitious that was, for example?
I think I used the word somewhere aspirational, or yes, it was quite low.
Yeah. Did you ever check approved document L during your time on the project to see what U value that guidance required for the thermal performance?
I don't recall doing so.
No, yeah. Were you aware that, as per this advice from Max Fordham, and the words in brackets, approved document L recommended that in circumstances where the entire wall at Grenfell was to be insulated, a U value of at least 0.30 watts per metre square Kelvin was to be adopted? That was the guidance.
I believe that's what that bracketed phrase confirms.
So that means, doesn't it, that it's a more generous piece of guidance in approved document L, the 0.3. If it's higher, it's a less efficient thermal insulator.
The principle being under L1B is that it's a refurb, and therefore there are less expectation of meeting the current requirements.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
Max Fordham were proposing the current requirements to bring the building up to current standards, whereas the guidance didn't require that.
No. And in fact, were you aware at the time that there was even more flexibility in the approved document L guidance, in that if it was not technically and functionally feasible to achieve the 0.3, then it just had to be upgraded to the best standard that's technically and functionally available? Did you know there was even more flexibility in those circumstances?
I can't remember specific knowledge of that.
Yeah.
No.
So I think we've established that in meeting the requirements of Part L, there is in fact considerable latitude in terms of the U value that's adopted, or that at the time there was considerable latitude in terms of the U value that could be adopted on this project.
To meet the requirements of Part L.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And were you aware when you were having these discussions about target U value? I mean, you've mentioned the 0.3 in the meeting, but in your mind, did you think to yourself, well, I know ultimately we've got some flexibility on this if that becomes necessary? Was that something that occurred to you?
Well, there it is, the 0.3.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
double. That.
Let's just turn, we're going to keep going chronologically through the sequence of events. So now I'm going to turn to an email of the 5th of July that you sent to Rockwool. If we can pull this up. This is at SEA 404967. Yeah.
Can I just say that 0.3 is double 0.15 in terms of performance?
Yes.
It's in retrospect, it has occurred to me that Max Fordham were equally aware of the flexibility
Yes.
of that margin.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
And that it probably would have tolerated a change in insulation spec.
I see. Yeah.
And so I think they would have been aware of that at this time.
Yeah. Okay. I'm
That's
primarily
in
interested in
retrospect.
whether you had that awareness of the flexibility available.
I was aware of the flexibility. I wasn't aware that it would allow us a straight switch between a foam insulation and a mineral wool,
I see. Okay.
which I think it would.
So let's turn then to that email, SEA 404967. So this is an email that you sent on the 5th of July 2012 to tech.inquiries@rockwool.co.uk. Do you see that at the top?
Yeah.
And it's about the Grenfell Tower regeneration, the subject matter. And I think you've sent a couple of drawings. And you say, we're looking at overcladding an existing 1970s residential tower block in London. It's 24 stories. The services engineer have indicated a target U value for walls of 0.15. The existing building has precast concrete spandrels 250 millimetres thick. And then you go into some detail about the drawing. And then in the next paragraph, you say, please could you advise the appropriate insulation type and thickness for this application and to achieve the desired U value. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then you've got a last comment about the roof area, which we don't need to look at. You seem to email a general inquiries email address within Rockwool at that point. Does that mean that you didn't have any specific contact yourself at Rockwool at that time, so that was the logical place to be asking?
Every company has their own approach. That email address is tech.inquiries. I think that I was aware of, or I phoned and discovered that they would like an email sent.
Yeah.
No, but if you're asking, as some companies might have individuals that, area managers, that's not the way Rockwool tended to work, not for a U-value inquiry.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. Okay. So we can see that you've sent off that email. Can we then look at another email on the 5th of July? This is SEA 404973. So this is you emailing Mr. McQuat and Mr. Smith and Mr. Watts at Max Fordham. And you attach something called Rockwool Duo Slab. And then you say you're disappointed in the first line that a meeting didn't happen today. Don't worry about that. Let's look at the last paragraph. You say there, we've sent off inquiries to Rockwool and Kingspan on the installation and await their reply. The 0.15 U value you've asked for looks to me a bit aspirational. See attached, which suggests approximately 450 millimetre plus of insulation. Do you see that there? So I think that's the email you were prefacing earlier in your evidence, that where you say it looks a bit aspirational. And what you do is you have attached something to this email. It was a spreadsheet. I just want to turn to have a look at that. So this is a SEA 401334. And it appears to be an analysis, I think, of the thickness that would be required of the Rockwool to achieve the U value required. Can you remember, did you put that attachment together?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. You're slightly grimacing, Mr. Soames.
No, I'm not grimacing.
No, sorry. Do you want to say something about that before I ask you some questions about it?
Well, I'll explain what I was doing, and I never got a response to it, so I don't know if anyone looked at it. The figures, the orange background, are taken direct from what would have been the PDF brochure or of the Rockwool Duo Slab product. In other words, the thickness and the U value for that assembly, and I think the assembly included the wall and the lining. And it's clear it only went down to 0.2, which is short of the target. So I graphed it, and because although the insulation has the biggest impact on the U value, it's not a linear relationship as the graph demonstrates. So all I was trying to do is, well, if I extrapolated the line, where would that leave me?
Yeah,
roughly?
exactly.
So it was sort of an amateur detective.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So you effectively put the dotted line on
Yeah.
to try and work out, to get to 1.5, roughly what thickness would you end up with? And that was your analysis. That wasn't an analysis you'd got from somebody else.
I was aware that they published these figures and that the ratio was not linear.
Yeah. Just thinking back to the language that was used in that covering email, you say the U value you've asked for looks to me a bit aspirational. So you say the U value you've asked for to Max Fordham. Did Max Fordham actually ask for that U value? What do you mean by asked for?
At the meeting, they put forward a U value of 0.15. So ask, that was their proposal.
I see. In your witness statement at paragraph 43.7, if we can just turn that up, at SEA 30144273, page 20, yes, you say the level of insulation on the building was originally proposed by Max Fordham at the project meeting on the 25th of June 2012. They proposed a U value of 0.15 watts per metre square Kelvin. So we see that there. What I want to put to you is that at the time it was merely a suggestion rather than something they were actually requiring. It was a suggested recommendation by them. Is that how you interpreted it at the time? Or did you think that they were being more definite with you that it had to be that?
There was nothing, in a sense, mandatory about their request. I mean, it was aspirational, and an aspirational for the sake of the project to maximise the thermal efficiency of the building.
Yeah.
I didn't see, it's clearly not required, but I've done a lot of work with Max Fordham, and this is very much a feature of their work and our work with them.
Yeah.
Had been to, I mean, aspirational doesn't mean irresponsible. It just means trying to do the best you can.
Yeah, I understand. Now,
sorry, can I ask, did they ever say at that meeting what the basis of the 0.15 was? Or did they just...
I think I knew it was mentioned that was the current requirement for a new build. I think I was aware of that at the time.
Yes, thank you.
yeah. Now, Mr. Smith of Max Fordham responds the same day. Can we look at that email next? So this is SEA 404978. So you've sent him your analysis of the build-up and you've said it looks a bit aspirational. And if we look at the first paragraph, he says in the second sentence, it would be good to discuss your proposed cladding window system at the same time. That's at a meeting. And then he says, those thicknesses of Rockwool seem a bit high. Does that also include the thermal bridging from fastenings, frame, etc., and a ventilated cavity? For a glass fibre slab, excluding fastenings, etc., we'd expect to be able to achieve 0.15 U value with approximately 180 millimetres material only. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then he goes on, a phenolic foam insulation would give greater insulation for the depth. Hopefully the response from Kingspan may be closer to target. And then he says something in the final paragraph about windows, which we don't need to worry about. So when you got this, do you agree that Mr. Smith of Max Fordham does seem to be questioning whether there really was a need for 450 millimetre depth of Rockwool? He thinks that's a bit high.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever go back and clarify that with Max Fordham? And say, well, can we do something more precise to have a look at what the thicknesses would be?
No, I don't think there's any evidence that I did.
He's raising in his email the question of thermal bridging from fastenings and frame, etc. And he's saying that could have a significant influence on the thickness of the product that would be needed. can you explain why he was saying that was relevant? Did you understand that at the time, why it might be relevant?
Yes, I think it reflects he didn't look at my email. The Rockwool figures would have accounted for the thermal bridging of the brackets.
Is the point that if you use thermally bridged brackets, that there's less heat transfer or heat loss through the bracketry, so they can help you keep your insulation narrower while still achieving the U value that you want? Is that the point?
No, I think in any calculation the brackets have to be factored as a thermal bridge, even with any thermal sort of neoprene thermal spacer. I think they still represent a bridge, that would be factored into any calculation.
But did you think at this time about what he might be suggesting is that if you use thermally broken brackets, that thermal bridging can be improved?
I think it was standard thermally broken brackets were standard, I think.
I see, okay. So your analysis did think about that, did it?
I believe the Rockwool figures reflect that, because it showed a full build-up.
Yeah. Now, you got a response from Rockwool on the 24th of July 2012. If we can turn that up, this is at SEA 405276, and I want to look at the top of page 2. So we see this is from a Mr. Pritchard at Rockwool to you on that date, 24th of July 2012. And he says this: "Dear sir, please accept my sincere apologies for the delay in getting back to you. Further to your email, we would normally recommend the use of our rain screen duo slab for these types of construction. However, due to the low specified U value, the thickness needed would be exceptionally high, probably beyond the point of sensible building practice." And then he goes on and talks about the roof in the last paragraph. And just before I ask you some questions about this, can we scroll then up to the top of page 1? And what we see is that you then forward that email from Rockwool to Mr. Smith and Mr. McQuat at Max Fordham. And you say, "Andrew, Matt, I asked Rockwool about achieving 0.15 U values, and this is their response below. We have been working on a maximum of 250 millimetre build-up to the spandrel zones. The decision on the final system is pending, but assume a 50 millimetre panel vent zone, leaving you 200 millimetres for insulation. The geometry at the columns results in a reduced build-up of approximately 200 millimetres, 150 millimetre insulation at high level, and then at low level you then say what you're thinking about." And then you say this in the next paragraph: "Pushing the cladding line any further out will probably have buildability below and aesthetic issues." Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, just on that, can you explain how you arrived at the geometric specification of between 150 millimetres and 200 millimetres for the part of the cavity in which the insulation would sit? That's what you're saying in that email.
How we came up with those figures?
Yeah, how did you arrive at that? Can you remember?
I can't remember exactly how we came up with those figures, no.
Did you ever consider increasing the size of the cavity in order that a mineral wool insulation could be used within the cladding system?
I think, based on that response from Rockwool, and if you do try and draw on what becomes more than half a metre of projection, it starts to become unfeasible. Just the projection of the brackets. I think the reason I believe the Rockwool were advising against it is the product itself is not that rigid, so it would require, I think, support of some sort.
Yeah.
So I think they recognise it as not being feasible for their product.
I see, yeah. In that third paragraph, that single sentence where you say pushing the cladding line any further out will probably have buildability below and aesthetic issues. Can you just explain exactly what you meant by buildability issues?
I'm referring to the comment from Rockwool that there wasn't a means short of putting a frame up to support the installation of that depth. That's the buildability. So as he says, it's not practical for that depth, for that product. Now here that's my interpretation of what he said.
Yeah, yeah. How could you be confident that there were any buildability issues if you hadn't confirmed that the 450 millimetre thickness of Rockwool would in fact be required to achieve the target U value of 0.15?
I'm sorry, how would I?
How could you be confident that there would be buildability issues if you hadn't actually confirmed that 450 millimetres of Rockwool would in fact be required to achieve the 0.15 U value?
Is that email from Rockwool confirm both the thickness and the...
Let's go back to the email from Rockwool just so you've got it in front of you. SEA 405276 at page 2. So he says, further to your email, we would normally recommend the use of it. However, due to the low specified U value, the thickness needed would be exceptionally high. Do you agree that he doesn't actually give a thickness?
Quantify it, no.
So he's not said to you, it's going to be 450 millimetres. That was your extrapolation on that graph, I think. Do you agree what he's just saying is, in general terms, he thinks the thickness would be exceptionally high?
Yes, beyond the point of sensible building practice. I'm not obviously sure what he meant by that.
And what I'm asking is whether you ever got that definitively confirmed, whether got someone to do an analysis to check, would it in fact be 450 millimetres?
I didn't, but of course, I guess I might have... No, I didn't.
Okay, yeah. And you also, in your email, you said that there might be buildability issues and aesthetic issues with having that a greater thickness of mineral wool. What did you mean by aesthetic issues?
I wasn't sure how that was going to work around these diamond columns.
Yeah.
For instance, on the corners, it would look probably something you would want to avoid, I think.
I see, yeah.
So I saw that as, whether it was feasible, we didn't know. Well, we've just been told it's not feasible, but I think aesthetically it would have been undesirable.
Yeah, yeah. And is that because the columns are already a kind of a thickness out from the
I think it's
spandrels, so that the columns already stick out, the concrete columns. So if you're putting then a big thickness onto that, you were worried how it might look at the corners?
At the corners, yeah. I think the bigger issue is how that would have impact on the windows next to the columns.
But you wouldn't know exactly how it would play out in terms of aesthetic issues, would you, if you haven't done the precise calculation? You wouldn't have known exactly what it would be.
No, but 450 did sound excessive. I mean, it's half a metre once you've added the cavity.
Is it the case that following the exchange of these emails, Studio E gave up on the possibility of using Rockwool as an insulating material in the building?
It's implying we should have pursued it.
Well, let me put it more neutrally. Was there any thought given after these exchanges of emails, to using Rockwool? Were there any further investigations about that you did, or anyone else did?
I think after following this email and following which I think you'll come to, the one from Kingspan, I did pass on a glass wool product to Max Fordham. I think after that, I did not pursue any other alternatives because it would appear the thermal conductivity of the foam products, Rockwool or any other fibre couldn't compete with.
Yeah.
Did you think at all about simply abandoning the 0.15 target in favour of a more relaxed target?
As I said, we've done a lot of work with Max Fordham, and they pride themselves as an aspirational engineer, and we've gone with them. When I say gone with them, we've participated in numerous designs where they have done exceptionally sustainable buildings, and by and large, that sustainability is driven by passive measures. So we supported that. So where possible, we would, for instance, in our schoolwork, we would try and naturally ventilate the classrooms rather than mechanically ventilate. And so that this emphasis on passive sustainability was something that we shared with Max Fordham over a number of years. So, without good reason, I at that point I couldn't see any reason to abandon the 0.15. It was in the project's interest to try and achieve it.
Right. Thank you.
Given that reliance on Max Fordham to provide specialist advice about the thermal performance, did you ever think about asking them to run the calculation as to precisely what thickness would be required of the Rockwool?
I didn't think of it because I didn't.
Yeah, no.
No.
But do you agree that given the ambiguity in Mr. Smith's email, you could have actually confirmed what the thickness actually would be with Max Fordham? You could have actually asked them to run that calculation. You would have got a precise figure back from them.
They did eventually do one.
With the Rockwool?
Not with the Rockwool, no, but with the Celotex.
Yeah. But I'm just asking, they could have done that calculation for the Rockwool if you'd asked them to, couldn't they?
I guess I was challenging them by that little exercise that I did.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily expect them to. I mean, I don't know what they thought of it, but they did.
Yeah.
They weren't prompted to disprove it.
Yeah. Can we just look at something in the inquiry's expert report, Mr. Hyatt's expert report? Can we go to PHYR 603 at page 19? Now, I don't know whether you've had a chance to consider this, but Mr. Hyatt has run the calculations to see what thickness of mineral wool could be achieved and what U value you would get. And his calculations are that with a mineral wool, it's possible for the spandrel condition to produce a 0.14 U value, so that's under the 1.5, against a 250 millimetre mineral wool insulation build-up. So it's perhaps thicker than you were envisaging in your email of 200, but it's 250. And for the column, it would be a 0.17. So this is a slightly worse U value than the 0.15 against a thickness of 180 millimetres mineral wool for the columns. Have you considered those before giving evidence?
I think our opening statement pointed you to the Rockwool website.
I beg your pardon, say that. Can you?
Studio E's opening statement, or perhaps it was the appendix, pointed you to the Rockwool website.
Right.
There's an online calculator,
Okay.
which came up with the same figure of 450 to achieve 0.15.
I see. So you're still saying you think it would be 450
I wouldn't. I wouldn't be so presumptive to think that my calculation is better or more accurate than these figures published by the manufacturer.
I see. Mr. Hyatt's calculations, just for completeness, appear at page 20 and 21. If we could just briefly look at those. So this is the calculation that he's done there for the columns, and it gives you the 0.17 there, and the 180 millimetre mineral will build up. And then I think over the page at 21, we get the 0.14 and the 250 millimetre mineral wool thickness for the spandrels. And both of those U values would be within the higher level of 0.30 that was in approved document L. Is it possible that the difference between Mr. Hyatt's calculations and the information which you were looking at the time via Rockwool is that, I'm going to put this to you again, that he has used thermally broken brackets which can make a difference in terms of the thermal efficiency and explain why a smaller thickness of insulation is required on his calculations? Is that possible that that might explain the difference?
I expect that Rockwool gave some thought to the figures they published, and whether the figures seem excessive because they've haven't allowed for thermal breaks, maybe one factor. There may be others. That's obviously a question for them.
Yeah.
But in the first instance, in researching the insulation, I certainly gave greater priority to the figures that were published by the suppliers than a spreadsheet that I could have done myself.
I see, okay. Can we go on and look at another email? This is SEA 30s14346. This is an email from Mr. Reck to you, dated the 25th of October 2013. So this was later in time than the exchanges we've just looked at. And it's an email, the subject is BRiam. Do you see that there? Is it right that BRiam means the BRE, Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And is it right that that's an established method of assessing, rating and certifying the sustainability of buildings?
Yes.
And Mr. Reck attaches his potential scoring assessment comments against BRiam. And then if we go to page 2, under the heading Mat 1, Environmental Impact of Materials, he talks about some assumptions about what's been achieved. And then there's this comment that I just want to ask you about. It's in black, as distinct from the blue text. He says, it also seems MF, Max Fordham, went for OTT U values to achieve maximum credits available for thermal performance criteria, which come to force if Green Guide rating credits do not manage to achieve the top 25 credits available. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you about what you understood to be the phrase OTT U values. Is that, do you think he's saying over the top U values?
Well, I did follow his evidence, yes, I believe he confirmed that.
Did you ever discuss at the time with Mr. Reck that he thought the Max Fordham U values were over the top?
I must be honest, the whole subject of BRiam wasn't one that I was much involved during the project.
Forget BRiam for a moment. At any time during the project, did you have a discussion with Mr. Reck about Max Fordham's U value, and in particular the 0.15 for the external wall, and whether that was over the top? Do you remember ever discussing that with him?
Over the top, it's got a sort of pejorative sense, which I do not recall.
No.
No.
So you don't recall having a discussion in those terms? No. Do you recall having any discussion with him about how ambitious that U value target was?
it wasn't ambitious. It was what the standard was for a new build. It wasn't super insulated. It was trying to match a new build.
I see. Did you ever go back to Max Fordham and discuss the possibility of increasing the U value at any stage on the project?
No.
Yeah. And can you help us as to why that discussion didn't happen? Why you never went back to them and discussed increasing it?
Well, with hindsight, obviously, no one challenged the insulation.
Yeah. Now, if we can bring up, so I'm picking back the chronology back up in July 2012 now, okay? And I want to look at SEA 404986. And we can see that on that date, you emailed Mr. Smith of Max Fordham, copying in a number of others, including at Max Fordham. And you say, Matt, Kingspan have come back with 200mm phenolic to achieve 0.15 U value, see attached. And then you say, I've attached a data sheet for glass fibre product. I'm rusty on calculations, but I interpret this product as having twice the thermal conductivity of phenolic and therefore needing twice the thickness. Do you see that? And again, I think you anticipated we'd come to this earlier in your evidence. Can we just have a look at the glass fibre insulation product data sheet that you attached to this email? We can look at that at SEA 401337. So this is headed Superglass, April 2012, Cladding Mat 37. And we see in the smaller text, just underneath that heading, it says Cladding Mat 37 is a resilient mineral wool insulation mat with a high tensile strength for use in the walls and roofs of profiled metal-clad buildings. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So it also appears to be a form of mineral wool insulation. And if we look in the bottom of page 1, in that little green bubble, yes, thank you, we can see from the first bullet, it's saying fire performance, fire classification A1 non-combustible. Now, you said in your covering email that you were rusty on calculations. Did you ever think to check your calculations in respect of the Rockwool product with Max Fordham or with Rockwool themselves?
Isn't that just a repeat of your earlier question?
It is, but it's with specific reference to you having said in that email that you were rusty on calculations.
Well, I was comparing the K value there, 0.037, with the Kingspan. Because I knew that the insulation has the biggest impact on the U value. So you could just look at those figures and see roughly where they sit next to each other.
When you were looking at this product, did you note the fire performance of this product?
No.
That wasn't something you looked at?
No.
And I think you said earlier, back in March, that you wouldn't have understood what the A1 meant. Is that right? The European classification method?
What it actually specifically means, no. I can't say I know now, but non-combustible means non-combustible.
Yeah. Now, if we can turn to SEA 405818. This is an email of the 15th of August 2012. And I want to pick up on what you say. So this is to Mr. McQuat of Max Fordham, and it's about the external wall and BRiam. And I want to pick up in the last paragraph. You say, we need to discuss U value insulation spec. I found a U value calculator here, and you give the link for that, and made a stab at insulation thickness to achieve the 0.15 U value. Attached is from the website. I'm not sure how to make allowances for the brackets. Remember, we have an issue with the insulation around the columns, and I don't want you advertising something we A, aren't showing, and B, we can't achieve. Can we discuss? Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, can you recall what those calculations showed in terms of the thickness of insulation that was needed?
No. So I haven't revisited this.
You say there, I'm not sure how to make allowances for the brackets. Could that be not sure how to make allowances for thermally broken brackets that we were discussing earlier?
No, for the thermal bridging that the brackets represent.
I see.
You have to allow that a certain amount of heat's going to find its way through the brackets.
And you weren't sure how to do that calculation, is that right?
Using that online calculator.
Yeah, I see. I see. Now, Mr. McQuat of Max Fordham replies to this on the 16th of August, the following day. Can we go to that SEA 405840? And he says this, Bruce, I've done the following calculations to work out how much insulation that we would need to achieve 0.15 overall. The Celotex FR5000 is a solid PIR board, data sheet attached. I think this is the only type of product that will give us the required performance. Kingspan also so a version of this. And then he says, can you comment on the spandrel panel, etc. So he provides at this point the data sheet, the product data sheet for the Celotex FR5000 product. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, did you know what PIR board was referring to in that second line? He says it's FR5000 is a solid PIR board. Did you know what PIR was?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I knew what it stood for, polyisocyanurate.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned previously that I had been aware of it for some time.
And what was your reaction when you received this email about the suitability of the Celotex FR5000 product for use in the overcladding system?
I can't recall.
Did you have any concerns about the reference to PIR board in this email? Did that ring any alarm bells for you?
No. No, I think going back, PIR and phenolic had become all but standard in every project this time.
When you say standard for every project, can you be clear what you mean? Every project you'd worked on?
Every project that I had worked on, there were exceptions, but invariably some form of foam board was used in the facades and on the roof.
I think we clarified at the very beginning of your evidence you hadn't done a residential overcladding above 18 metres before, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So these other projects were low-rise projects.
5 stories.
Is that right? Yeah. Now, I just want to pick up at this point something that you've said in your witness statement. If we can look at that at this point. This is SEA 30144273 at page 55. And I want to look at the very last sentence at the top of that page on 116.2. This is where you're discussing the Celotex FR5000. And you say this, none of Max Fordham, CEP, Exova, or any other specialist I had discussed the project with had raised this as a technical design issue. And I think you mean this as in its fire performance. Is that right?
It's Class O fire performance.
Yeah. So you're saying none of those bodies on the project had raised the Celotex FR5000 being a technical, and its Class 0 fire performance as a technical design issue. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Is it your evidence that because neither Max Fordham nor CEP nor indeed Exova ever raised the question of compliance of FR5000 with you, that Studio E had no reason to think that it was non-compliant with the building regulations or the guidance in ADB?
Is that the only reason? I can't believe it's the only reason. I think products, these types of products were widely used.
Yeah.
Can you just help me with this? You, you say that these foam boards had become quite common on projects that you dealt with.
There had been a distinct, with the tightening of the Part L requirements, over 5-10 years,
Yeah.
the
What I'm really interested in now is this. You obviously knew about those boards from what you've told us, and I suspect you knew that they were quite efficient. Your first instinct, on the other hand, was to reach for the Rockwool.
Yes.
Why was that?
It's the safest. There was a time when BRiam assessments would only give a Class A, would only give Rockwool Category A status, so maximum points could only be achieved with Rockwool. When I started as a young architect, that's all we used. So, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Can I just be completely clear? When you say it's the safest, do you mean the safest in terms of fire performance or the safest in terms of its thermal performance?
But no, I'd say safest in terms of fire, but also in terms of its sustainability in a broader sense, the embodied carbon recyclability. It was always regarded as the safest choice.
Yeah. Did you have any awareness, once the Rockwool fell out of the picture, that what you were looking at with other products was less safe from a fire performance point of view? Did you have any awareness of that at the time?
I'd have to agree that you can't put them side by side and say the mineral wool isn't less likely to burn. Obviously, it's not going to burn. But at the time, I was of the view, which I think I've said, that the Celotex didn't burn; it just charred. In other words, the whole history of polyurethanes had been solved, and it was safe to use in cavities.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
my understanding at the time.
Yeah. Did there ever come a time when you asked Max Fordham, before the NBS specification was prepared, whether the use of FR 5000 was compliant with the building regulations and the guidance in approved document B? Were they ever asked that question?
No.
Now, we looked in detail in your evidence last time at the advice and the written advice produced by Exova. Is it right that there was never any written advice from Exova about the suitability of FR 5000 before the NBS specification was prepared?
No.
Or any verbal advice from Exova? Did you ever discuss the suitability of FR 5000 before you put the NBS together?
I personally did not, no.
Did it ever occur to you that it might be a good idea to ask Exova to comment specifically on the suitability of using the Celotex FR 5000 product?
No, it didn't. And just why I say personally it never occurred to me is Adrian Jess and Thomas Reck had independent conversations with Exova. So I don't personally know of any discussions with Exova of their. I'm not aware that they had any conversations with Exova, and I'm aware that I didn't have any conversations with Exova. Yeah. We did not. I know you're coming to this, but we did not put forward proposals to Exova because we, as I saw it, didn't have a firm scheme for them to assess.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it was one form of board or another, I knew that it's just a board. It's just a zone at stages C and D.
Okay. Turning to CEP and thinking about them for a moment, did you ever specifically raise the proposed use of FR 5000 with them?
I don't recall.
Now, Turning then to your witness statement, can we go on, this is SEA 30142773 at page 114, and I want to look at paragraph 270. And you say here, I got in touch with Harley on the 11th of September 2013, and we arranged to meet on the 27th of September 2013. We arranged to meet near London Bridge Station, and the meeting took place at a coffee shop in Hayes Galleria. And you say it was Ray Bailey, Mark Harris, both Harley, Thomas Reck, Studio E, and me. And then you say before the meeting, Thomas Reck emailed Mark draft elevations, details, wind load calculations, and U-value targets. Now, I'm going to come back to ask you about this Hayes Galleria meeting when we're talking about the aluminium composite panels, because we're going to look at that in detail in a moment. But I just want to focus for a minute on the insulation. You then say at paragraph 271, just below that in your statement, if we can read it out, you say, I was of the understanding that PIR products were generally safe to use in cavities. This was based on my general awareness that it had been widely used in the construction industry in the last 20 years, during which time I had not heard it constituted a fire hazard. My understanding was that it would only char when subjected to a flame, and it had also been marketed with certification from the Loss Prevention Certification Board as part of steel composite panels, which are very widely used. When I met Harley, I believe I had a lingering uncertainty about PIR because this was a high-rise, and I had not been involved in a high-rise before. I believe, but I cannot say for sure, that I asked Ray Bailey a question about the acceptability of using rigid foam insulation on a high-rise building, probably at the end of the meeting. If I did, I don't recall he provided a definitive response. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, you've set out your understanding about PIR products at the beginning of that paragraph and what your general awareness was. Was that your understanding at the time you met Harley on the 27th of September 2013?
Yes.
Yeah. And where you say that you thought they were generally safe to use, was that your expectation was that that would also be in high-rise buildings as well prior to that meeting?
Given that it had been put forward by Max Fordham, that had been my understanding, but I believe I did ask the question.
Where did your understanding come from that PIR products only char when subjected to a flame? What was that based on?
I'm having déjà vu. I remember in my previous practice, would have been 98, 99, the Celotex representative visiting and presenting their products. And part of that presentation, I'm going to say it wasn't a CPD, it was a around the table discussion which covered the polyurethane fires. And I have looked it up. I believe he did refer to the Sun Valley fire, where it was prior to the reduction in use of polyurethanes, they represented a hazard because they could burn within cavities, they could smoulder long distances. And the message and the understanding that I had over 20 years was polyurethane doesn't do that. Sorry, polyisocyanates doesn't do that. If you check Wikipedia,
Yeah.
There's a video which gives you an illustration of what I understood.
Okay. Yeah. You then go on and you're talking about having, you believe, a lingering uncertainty about PIR because it was a high-rise. Was the lingering uncertainty in relation to fire safety or some other lingering uncertainty?
No, it would have been its fire.
It would have been its fire. Do you have any recollection of discussing insulation with Mr. Bailey of Harley at that meeting? Can you actually recall discussing the insulation as distinct from the rain screen panels?
I believe I asked him about the acceptability of using a rigid foam, and I might not have mentioned it as Celotex. We did discuss insulation in the round because we discussed the assembly of the facade,
Right.
sequence, how it would all be supported. So in a general sense, we did discuss insulation. On reflection, I believe one of the reasons I might have been prompted to ask, not just any kind of lingering uncertainty, but I think we were shown several pictures of the Ferrier Point tower under construction. And those in progress construction, you could quite clearly see where the insulation was mineral wool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's in hindsight. Those pictures have been disclosed by the inquiry, but we didn't receive digital copies until 6 months later, I believe.
Do you know now exactly which pictures you're referring to?
Do you want me to?
Have you got a ref?
I've got a reference. 00003497.
Is that a Studio E document?
Sorry, SEA. Yes.
Yeah, SEA. Okay. Let's just. I'll take you to that in a moment. Can I just pick up on something you said? You said you asked him about the acceptability of using rigid foam insulation on a high-rise building. What did you mean by acceptability?
I think it probably is a regulatory question as to whether the regulations would accept it.
From recollection, would Mr. Bailey have understood it? Oh, sorry, I can't ask you that. But is that how you meant him to understand what you were asking him? Were you clear that he'd understood you were asking about the compliance with the building regulations? Or is it possible, I mean, can you actually remember using the word acceptability?
No, I can't remember what words I used. Is it okay? Yeah, I can't. I mean, I'd speculate. I cannot recall.
When you say, is it okay, is that you saying what you might have said to him?
I might have said that, but I can't remember. The reason why it wasn't minuted, in my mind, I didn't think it was a key issue. I did a set of notes from this meeting, and I didn't minute this. I didn't think it was something I needed to report back on. And I don't even think I necessarily asked it while we were sitting down. I think I might have said it after we'd stood up. It was an afterthought.
And is your best recollection now that you might have said, is it okay?
That's a bit of guessing, but that might have been what I said.
So does it remain that your evidence that you believe, but you can't say for sure, that you raised a question with Mr. Bailey at the end of the meeting?
I can't say for sure, but I believe I did.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of discussing fire safety any more generally at this meeting with the Harley representatives?
I'm trying to think if there was anything that may have had a bearing, but I can't think of anything. No.
If you were going to ask Mr. Bailey a question because you were concerned about compliance, would you agree that you'd probably have asked, is PIR safe to use on a high-rise building? You'd have put the question that way.
If I had any serious concern, I would have asked that first.
Yeah.
As I said, it was an afterthought. It wasn't a serious concern.
And are we to understand that the reason it was an afterthought is because of exactly what you said in the beginning of this paragraph, that your general understanding was that it was safe to use?
Yes.
because of what you'd understood before this?
Yes. And I think I was aware that it was used on high rises. I can't point or anything firm, but you see the buildings going up.
Yeah,
Insulation's sometimes exposed, and you do see it.
I see. Did you ever raise that lingering uncertainty with Exover, the fire safety specialist, at any time?
Well, no. If it was a genuine concern, I would have raised it directly.
But you didn't ever do that?
No. In this context, I think it was because of all the mineral wool that was used on Ferrier Point. I think I was prompted just to mention it, because that was one of the differences between Ferrier Point and Grenfell was the insulation.
And did it ever occur to you that it might be sensible to get written advice from Exover addressing this specifically and the compliance of using a PII product?
Exover were appointed to provide a fire strategy. At this stage, and even thereafter, I did not look at them as being necessarily providing detailed checking of specification. I mean, that doesn't feature in their outline fire strategy. That's not the focus of their work.
Yeah. At this point, I promised you I'd take you to the document that you've just referred me to. Let's do that now. This is SEA 403497. So is what you're saying that this is one of the images that you were shown at that meeting?
I can't be sure I was shown that image, but I believe that there were a handful of which inquiry has
Okay.
showing the construction of the tower with the panels half on.
Yeah. And that was at that Hayes Galleria meeting?
Yes.
You're sure about that?
Pretty sure. Yeah.
I've asked you about Exover. Did you ever go back and seek a definitive response from elsewhere, for example, from Max Fordham, about the acceptability of using the PIR on a high rise?
No, because that wouldn't really fall to them.
What about with building control? Do you have any recollection of ever asking building control whether they were content for a PIR insulation to be used on a high rise?
I'm not aware. I do not recall.
Does that mean you can't remember, or you can't recall having that specific discussion with building control?
Same thing. I don't recall any conversations on the subject myself.
With building control?
The conversations with building control, as it was covered in all of Exover's testimony, really did focus on the inside,
Yeah.
and particularly the smoke and the escapes.
Now, as you've mentioned, you've said candidly that there is no written record of you querying the PIR insulation with Harley and Ray Bailey at this meeting. Mr. Bailey doesn't refer to any such question having been posed to him in his statement, albeit we'll in due course be able to ask him about this. But I want to put it to you, is it not more likely that you actually didn't raise this issue at all with Harley, given you had this confidence in the use of PIR?
No, I think if you look at that secret, I mean, I asked Thomas Reck if he remembered anything. He couldn't remember anything. So I don't expect Ray Bailey to remember it. But if you look at all the pictures together, I think, yeah, you might ask the question.
Because what you're saying is all the pictures together definitely clearly showed some insulation as well as
lots
the...
of mineral wool, yeah.
Yeah. showed lots of mineral wool specifically.
These pictures show a tower which is a similar height to Grenfell, and it's all mineral wool.
Are you saying that that's what mineral wool that we can actually see there now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, that yellow, so the yellow substance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can tell immediately what that is.
So you can tell from looking at that that's mineral wool,
Yes.
as distinct from a PIR board.
Which has got the silvered
Because it's not got the foil with the product
yes.
logo on the outside. Yes, I see. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a good moment for a break.
Yes, all right.
If that's okay.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a break now, Mr. Soames. We take slightly longer breaks than we did in the past to give other people the chance to feed questions into council. So we're going to break now until 25 to 12, and you can go and stretch your legs, maybe get a cup of coffee. But please remember not to talk to anyone else about your evidence or anything to do with Studio E's involvement in this matter. All right, while you're out of the room. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to go with the usher. Right, 25 to 12, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, would you like to ask Mr. Soames to come back, please? Right, Mr. Soames, I'm sorry that the break was rather longer than we'd intended. There were some practical problems with the technical equipment. I hope someone told you what was going on.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Anyway, you ready to carry on now?
I am.
Yes? Yes, Ms.
Thank
Green?
you. Yes. Yes, so Mr. Soames, I just want to take you to another. We've looked up the picture you gave us and we've found another one in the series, I think, that you referred to, that you were shown at the Hayes Galleria meeting. Can we go to SEA 403516? There we go. And that's more of a close-up of the Ferrier Point project. So is that the kind of photo you think you were shown at that meeting?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the mineral wool is the pale yellow
Yes.
substance that's behind the cladding, and you know instantly it's not a PIR or other phenolic product because it doesn't have the foil facer with the insulation name on it.
You can see
that
that
right?
it's the mineral wool.
You can see it's mineral wool, you're
Yeah,
saying? Yeah.
yeah.
Great. Thank you. And then just another question picking up on my last theme. Did Mr. Crawford ever say to you that he had got an assurance from Exova that the RS 5000 product was safe from a fire point of view? So we know RS 5000 is the same as FR 5000, it was just marketed differently. Did Mr. Crawford ever say that he'd had that assurance from Exova?
I obviously watched Neil's testimony, and I was copied in to those emails September 14 and March 15. I think you're asking me to summarise all of that.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you, at the time of the Grenfell project, thinking back at the time, try and forget the evidence that you heard in the inquiry. Do you remember Mr. Crawford ever saying to you that he'd got an assurance from Exova that the RS 5000 was safe from a fire point of view?
As I say, I thought that was covered in those emails much later.
I see. So you didn't know any more than was in those email chains that were being disclosed at the
Correct.
time? Yeah.
And
Range, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you, is your transcript functioning properly?
No, actually, it's gone back up to the top again.
Well, mine keeps resetting itself every few seconds, as far as I can see.
I think that was part of the problem this morning. That
I think it was. I interrupt you only in case you, or those behind you, need to have it working. I mean, I can manage without it.
Mine's fine.
Yours working all right? There's this is working all right, so we don't need to stop. I can't really. It looked to me as though the feed onto the large screens is running pretty normally. Is that right? Yeah. All right. Well, then I can manage without it.
Let's carry on. Ideally, I would have it because it is helpful for me to have it. But let's carry on for the moment.
Yours is not functioning either.
Not right now.
Well, will you let me know if it's a problem?
Yeah, I will.
And then we'll see what can be done. Thank you.
So now I want to look at an email from September 2013. This is SEA 408790. So if we can just blow up the top half of that for now. This is an email from you on the 27th of September 13 to various people on the project, including some TMO personnel, Matt Smith of Max Fordham as well, and some Artelia people are there, to each in Lim, we see. And you say this in the first paragraph: "Dear all, we met with Harley Curtain Wall this morning to discuss the project. They are very keen and have been tracking the project for some time. They are specialists in this type of project," and then you've given a link to their webpage. "They pointed to Ferrier Point as being very similar to Grenfell, although it is triple glazed and super insulated. We had forwarded them sample details and the elevation measure beforehand." Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So you're referring there to the Ferrier Point project as being very similar, and it's the Ferrier Point project photos you think you were shown in that meeting?
Yes.
That's correct. Did you say there the Ferrier Point, they pointed to Ferrier Point as being very similar to Grenfell. Did you interrogate whether the similarity related to the insulation type or solely to the use of ACM?
Neither, actually. I think it was a tall council block which had been overclad and the windows replaced.
I see.
That's the biggest
Yeah.
obvious
So
part.
that's what made it similar in terms of a project.
Yeah.
I understand. Now, there's no reference here to any specific discussion about the insulation. We may come back to some of this in terms of the ACM, but we can't see anything specifically said about the insulation in this email, is there? No. Now, I now want to look at what the NBS specification said about the insulation. This was part of the employer's requirements. And just for the record, you begin to address this at paragraph 286 and following of your witness statement. When you drafted the insulation section of the NBS specification, did you ever send that to Exova or Max Fordham so they could comment on that aspect of the specification?
Well, I didn't prepare the specifications. You would normally consult with a relevant person while preparing them. You wouldn't necessarily use them as a checker. But I don't recall, obviously, sending it.
And when you say I didn't prepare the specification, is that because you're saying it was other more junior representatives of Studio E that were doing the specification
Yes.
work?
I think we discussed this previously. I think it was shared somewhere between Thomas Reck and Adrian Dress, and I might have done some of it. I know I did the last bit, which was a section on a revision to the doors.
Right,
but
yeah.
I don't recall doing anything else.
Yeah. Can we just look at the NBS specification? This is a SEA 50169. It's dated the 30th of January 2014. You see that in the little revisions box, the tiny text there. 30th of January, L1 doors revised. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So this seems to have been a revised version that was issued because there'd been a change to the L20 doors package. And then within that, can we go to page 63? And this is the start of the 892 rain screen cladding section. And then if we go on within that to page 73, and we look at the top of that page, we blow that up, 776 thermal insulation. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we can see it says manufacturer Celotex, 2 lines down. And then there's actually the product given a bit further down, product reference FR5000, aluminium foil face both sides. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you know who put together this part of the MBS specification within Studio E?
I can't, I mean, I can only guess, but I think it's a bit unfair. No,
Was it you that put together this section? Are you clear that you did it, do it, or didn't
I'm
get involved
reasonably
in it?
confident that it wasn't me.
It wasn't you.
No.
In which case, I'm not going to ask you some of the detailed questions we put to Mr. Reck on this. Can we just look back at your witness statement? This is SEA 30144273 at page 118. And I want to look at what you say at paragraph 287 in the first sentence. You say, with regard to the insulation, I refer you back to paragraphs 43.9 and 116.2, where I discuss how the insulation was selected by Max Fordham, and then you give the specification for the insulation in the MBS, which we've just looked at. And I just want to focus on the use of your word selected. Does it remain your evidence that the insulation was selected by Max Fordham?
They put it forward in the first instance.
Would you agree with me, therefore, that a more accurate description of what happened is that Max Fordham suggested the use of a particular insulation product, but it was Studio E as architect who then specified it in the employer's requirements?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Now, looking down just a little bit further on in your witness statement at this point, at paragraph 292 on page 121, you say in third line down on 121, you say, at this stage, we would not go beyond addressing the issues raised by building control in the early meetings, specifically on the 6th of November 2012, which Adrian Jess attended, and 17th September 2013, Paul Hanson's building control comments received 31st December 2013, and the input from Exova regarding fire strategy. We would not usually seek to verify compliance of all materials and products prior to submitting a building control full plans application. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, we know that, and we'll come to this later when I ask you some questions about building control, that you didn't actually submit the building control full plans application until August 2014. And I want to ask you about that last sentence. Can you explain why it was Studio E's practice not to verify the compliance of materials and products prior to submitting a building control full plans application?
Well, full compliance is only possible through an application, as I understand it. You don't know until you've had the submission verified and agreed with building control, so your compliance is subject to receiving that certificate. It all depends on that process. I think your more general question is, would we seek to satisfy ourselves that it would comply?
Yes.
Yes.
That's my general
Yes.
question. Wouldn't you
Now-
seek to satisfy yourselves about compliance of the materials and products prior to submitting a building control full plans application?
invariably it's not something you doubt. If you've specified something you think is suitable or you have been recommended as suitable, you do not expect to be told once you've submitted with it.
But do you agree if you don't do an internal check that the materials are compliant prior to submitting the building control application, you're at risk of making a submission that might be non-compliant with the building regulations?
I think every application involves a process of agreeing materials with building control, and there is some risk attached to that in every project. On a design and build project, Stage E in particular, I think it's not possible to confirm compliance. Well, not that it's not possible. Your efforts could come to nothing if the contractor makes a change. So you're unlikely to be sure that you have complied anyway. So I think it would be nice. It was not common practice to do a full Part B compliance assessment at Stage D or at Stage E. That was not.
Yeah. And I think what you've just said is because otherwise you'd be concerned that there'd be a change and it would be wasted work. Is that what you're saying?
That'd be one reason, yes.
Any other particular reasons?
A building control might take a different view.
So is what you're saying that effectively what you're doing by putting a building control full plans application in is opening up a dialogue with building control about the compliance of the materials? Is that what you're saying?
I think every project we seek to engage building control at the earliest opportunity to understand issues that need to be addressed. Yes, I think that's my experience going back as far as I can remember. We would seek to get building control's input on the salient issues.
So just to be clear, does it follow that there might be building control full plans applications you're submitting where you're not entirely sure that building control are going to agree that the materials are compliant, and you're anticipating they might come back at you and challenge that?
At Stage E, I would expect them to be minor details.
I'm talking about when the full plans application's gone in, Mr. Soanes. Are you sometimes putting in the full plans application? So that would be after Stage E, yes?
Full plans is, in the first instance, is the general arrangements, and the details usually follow.
But when those details are submitted, are there times when you're putting those details in and they've got certain products in them and you're thinking to yourself, actually, some of those building control might challenge, might pick up on, and we might have to discuss that further with them? Is that part of the thought process?
Obviously, if there was any concern, we would raise it sooner. And I think that is the root of your question, is why weren't we concerned?
Well,
we had no reason to be concerned.
Could you just help me a little further on this? Would you satisfy yourself that materials complied with the regulatory requirements before you put them up to building control?
Regulatory requirements and statutory standards.
Well, whatever.
These aren't the way people approach the approved document.
Let me explain. I'm a little surprised if you're saying that you would propose materials to building control without being reasonably confident in your own mind that they did comply with any necessary requirements.
We were reasonably confident that they complied.
So you would satisfy yourself, are you saying, before you put materials up for consideration by building control, that they did comply?
In our minds, we had no reason to be concerned.
Well, that may or may not be quite the same thing, but anyway, on you go, Mr. Green.
Well, the standards, as you've referred to them before, imply that it's a clear cut, whereas my experience is satisfying the requirements of Part B is not so clear cut.
No, that I understand. I just wondered what was lurking in this sentence that you've been asked about, that you wouldn't seek to verify compliance before you submitted a full plans application. And I just wanted to understand whether you were saying that you would put up materials without being satisfied yourself of their compliance.
No, I think that's taking it a bit, a very wide interpretation of that statement.
Well, that's why I'm giving you an opportunity to explain it.
Where products had been used before, in the same instance, in the same circumstances, whether it be by ourselves or where we were aware in this instance that they had been used elsewhere, we had a measure of confidence that the materials must comply. Is that,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, it's
All right. Yes, thank you. Yes, Miss Grange.
Would you agree that if you don't take proactive steps to satisfy yourselves on each particular project that the materials are compliant, that there could be a significant impact on programme and cost if it suddenly turns out that there's a non-compliance in the application?
most definitely there's a risk of impact on programme and cost. And I think as a lead designer, you're thinking of that throughout.
I see.
In your design.
Okay. Is what you've described, so this process of saying, well, if it's been used in a similar type of project, we don't have to be, we don't have to be concerned about the compliance. Do you think that was common in the construction industry at the time? Was that an attitude you had to other projects within Studio E?
I think if I can take the example of the insulation.
Yeah.
There's an email from Ledbetter Bouygues that we received, I think it was in January 2013, from a Juan Medina. It doesn't appear in my statements, and I have no idea if it's been disclosed, but he's responding to Adrian about the insulation. He says, I think you may need to use phenolic because it's a high-rise. So if you're asking me, was it Studio E's policy? I think there is a common understanding of where issues are and what is acceptable. And I think at that point, in 2013, people understood it was acceptable.
Yeah, I understand.
So if there had been any alarm raised from any quarter, I think it would have come through quickly.
Now, if you, Studio E, didn't take proactive steps yourselves to verify compliance before the building control full plans application, when in the process would you expect compliance of the materials to be addressed, either by you or someone else? So you haven't taken those proactive steps prior to the building control full plans going in. Is it a question of just waiting for building control to come back to you? Or would you conduct a compliance assessment yourselves, a positive one, at some point?
I think you asked me this before, and that is a duty which goes, I would argue, goes far beyond our role at any point. What I think, for instance, the smoke ventilator subcontractor did is he engaged in a dialogue from an early point with building control to reach an agreement. and that was a particularly difficult item. Usually in preparing your designs, it's when you get to the final detail design that you would, to avoid abortive work, never mind any impact on the project, you would try and understand for yourself that it complied.
Let's take your example, the insulation, which is what we've been discussing as an example. So you yourselves haven't positively sought to go out and confirm that it does in fact comply. You've assumed that from basically the fact you know it's been used on other projects. What is the position after the full plans application goes in? If building control don't come back to you and query the insulation, does there come another point in the process where you, Studio E, would have checked for compliance with the building regulations?
Not on this project. I don't think we would. It's a design and build. I'm not sure that the full effect of design and build is understood by the inquiry. It does sideline the original architect's role from what it was pre-innovation. We're no longer, in any sense, policing what other people are doing.
Okay. Now, before we leave the topic of insulation, I just got a few questions about the selection of the insulation after the employer's requirements were prepared. Did you ever review, as far as you were aware, or did Studio E review the specification of Celotex FR 5000 once the design was changed to the Rainabon ACM panels in order to check whether the products were suitable in this different application?
No.
Did you ever ask Harley, Exova or Ryden whether the change of cladding arrangement had any implications on the type of insulation to be used?
No.
Now, in fact, we know that it was Celotex RS 5000, which was finally chosen for use on the project, and not the FR 5000 product. Do you know when that substitution took place?
I don't know.
No. Were you aware of that substitution at the time?
I might have been. I was copied in on the emails, so, but whether I was, I can't remember.
Do you know why this different Celotex product was selected?
I'm afraid too much time has passed.
I'm just seeking to understand how involved you were in that bit of the project, because I know by that point Mr. Crawford was more the day-to-day point of contact within Studio E.
I'm afraid I'm at risk of saying something that overlaps with something that he said, and I'm not sure.
Okay. I do want to ask you something about Mr. Crawford's evidence and what he said. He said, this is day 9, page 139, lines 18 to 20. He said that you were fairly adamant about the appropriateness of using FR 5000 on the project.
Me?
Yes, that you had been he said you were fairly adamant about using the FR 5000 with reference to what was in the NBS specification. Did you make that clear to Mr. Crawford?
Sorry, what was the context?
Mr. Crawford said in his evidence that you were fairly adamant about the appropriateness of using the FR 5000 on the project. That's what he said. And I just wanted to ask whether you recall having conversations with Mr. Crawford in which you were expressing a confidence or being adamant with him that FR 5000 was appropriate.
I can't remember, I'm afraid, any conversation that was that definitive.
Okay. So I just want to ask you just a few questions about the Calc project, the Kensington Academy Leisure Centre project, and then we're going to come on to look at the big topic for today, which will be the ACM panels. So you told us back in March, on day 7 of your evidence, that you were involved in Calc, but primarily in the bid process. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also said that you were aware of the specifications for the calc project, such as the external wall build-up, but that came later. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you recall when you came to know about the details of the external wall build-up on the calc project, specifically for the school? Can you recall approximately when you might have known about that?
I'm a bit unsure what you're going to ask me about the calc facade, because I'm not that familiar with it.
Okay. Well, let me ask my questions, and if you're not familiar with it, then please say. Can we just go to SEA 406047? And I want to look at the third email down on that page, at the very bottom of the page. This is from Mr. Cushel to Mr. Lloyd Jones, copying you and others in within Studio E. And you say, David, let's stick with Wednesday for a design review. And then you say this: the technical audit for calc would best be carried out by Bruce or Mark or both. And then you talk about availability. Were you ultimately asked to do the technical audit for the calc project?
I can't remember.
You can't remember?
No.
So you can't remember whether you did it on the calc?
I can't remember, sorry. No. I might have done. I think Neil would have formalised it. In other words, the record would have been, I think, prepared by him. So I might have done, but because I didn't prepare anything, I don't recall.
I see. So you're saying because Mr. Crawford might have prepared the documents for it.
Yeah, more clear to me and to you that he was involved, but I don't recall being involved.
Okay.
It's possible, though.
Okay. Perhaps I can ask then, were you aware that on the academy, that the school project, a non-combustible mineral insulation had been used in the cladding system? Was that something you had an awareness of at the time?
No.
And there's a document which shows that the build-up was an ACM panel with combustible styrofoam insulation backed with a non-combustible mineral insulation. Now, remember, the academy was a low-rise building, so I'm not suggesting that was non-compliant. I'm just asking you whether you knew about that wall build-up and the use of the non-combustible mineral insulation as part of it.
No.
No. Okay, so let's move now to ask, I'm going to ask you some questions about the rain screen cladding itself, the ACM, and including the eventual decision to use the aluminium composite material panels. Can we start by looking at paragraph 71 of your statement? This is SEA 30144273 at page 35. And you say this, you say, after some searching online, I approached CEP Architectural Facades Limited, CEP, a cladding product supplier, with a view to meeting to discuss the project. As I recall, CEP had experience in overcladding residential towers, particularly in the Midlands where they were based. And then you say, my recollection is that Jeff Blades of CEP may have met one of my colleagues, possibly Marcus Kiefer, on site in April. This is 2012, by the way, so this is early on. And I met him at our office a week or so later, perhaps on the 11th of April 2012. And then you say, Jeff emailed me detailed drawings for a project called Stretford House on the 5th of April 2012. They showed a multi-storey brick building with new windows, external insulation and ACM cladding. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, I just want to be completely clear about how CEP came to be involved. Is it right that you were not familiar with CEP before this project?
No.
And you found them, as you say there, by searching on the internet, is that correct?
Yes.
Was there anything particular that drew your attention towards them?
Overcladding of high-rise. In other
Yeah.
words, council blocks.
So you could see that on their profile, could you?
Yes.
Yeah. And they're a cladding product supplier, is that right?
That's in retrospect. At the time, I wasn't entirely clear what they did. I know they were involved, but I wasn't sure if they were a contractor or fabricator or supplier.
I see, yeah. Can we then go to CEP 3048112? And I want to look in the middle of that first page to the email, yes, of the 4th of April 2012 from Mr. Kiefer to Jeff Blades, copying you in. And he says, "Dear Jeff, Bruce instructed me to issue you some information regarding the Grenfell Tower upgrade. Hence, find attached our drawing showing indicative existing floor plans and the south elevation as well as photos of the tower. Since we are further meeting with the client on the morning of the 9th of April 2012, we would appreciate your initial thoughts regarding the appropriate cladding systems and the rates associated with them. And then if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to contact Bruce or myself." Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then he says, note, this is one of 5 emails because of the size of the attached files. So you're asking CEP for their initial thoughts. And then if we can go to Mr. Blades' response, this is at SEA 403941. If we can blow that up. So this is his response. It's just to you on the 5th of April. He says, "Bruce, please see the attached details which may be of benefit for your meeting on Tuesday." Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we can see from the attachments that what he's done is he's emailed you drawing details of a multi-storey brick building called Stretford House, which had new windows, external insulation and ACM cladding. Now, do you recall having any impressions of the details provided to you by CEP when you received them?
No. I may have opened one or two, but at the time, given that the project was just setting out, I don't believe I looked at them or scrutinised them in any detail.
Yeah. Did you notice that from this, the details that were sent, that the CEP system involved Rockwool insulation?
No.
We can see that just to make that good. Let's look at SEA 403943. This is one of the details that he sent you. We can see it's for the Stretford House project and the label on the bottom right-hand corner. And if you look on the left-hand side, the first written label, if we can zoom into that, yeah, it says Rockwool duo slab insulation there. Do you see that?
Yeah.
But you didn't note that at the time. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Blades of CEP what insulation product to use at the on Grenfell?
No, this was before the U-value discussion started. I mean, this was within a week or two within a month of our first site visit.
Yeah. Did you notice at the time that some of these drawings refer to fire barriers within the cladding build-up?
I did not notice that at the time.
Yeah.
No.
Now, let's go on to SEA 403965. And I want to look at the second email down on the first page. This is an email from you to Mr. Blades of the 10th of April 2012. And it's clear from the email that you've arranged to meet at site the following day when this email's sent. And because you say in the beginning, we would like to meet at site tomorrow rather than our office. And you say the site address is a little complicated, you give the address. I might need to leave before you get there. And then in that last paragraph on that page, you say it's important to be discreet while we are there, as the political context for the development and the development of the adjoining site is very sensitive. I would refrain from discussing with residents or staff who you might meet or discussing drawings where anyone can see them. There is enough misinformation about on the estate and we don't want to add to it unwittingly. Now, I'm going to come back and ask you about this in the context of the whole question of resident engagement separately, but just it's part of the chronology here. Did you end up meeting Mr. Soons on site?
Sorry,
I beg your pardon, you are Mr. Soon. Mr. Blades on site the next day.
I don't think I can't remember meeting him. No.
Do you recall that? Have any recollection of meeting? You said I might need to leave before you get there, so it's possible it was Mr. Kiefer that he met.
Well, I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him on site. I think Marcus might have met him on site. That's the memory I'm trying to draw on.
You say in that email that the political context was sensitive. The political context for the development and the development of the adjoining site is very sensitive. Why did you say that? What was the reason for that?
Prior to this, I had received an email from Mark Anderson from the TMO warning me of speaking to someone in the TMO saying that Well, go back to the context. The context was the development of the Calc project. The development on the adjoining site is very sensitive, and there had been some objections raised to that development. The reason I think I might have warned him is to not discuss things openly was that email from Mark Anderson.
I see. Okay. Now, as you said just a moment ago, in your statement, you said that you think you met Jeff Blades at your offices the next day on the 11th of April 2012. That was at paragraph 71 of your statement. Mr. Blades recalls that it was a meeting on site, and we can see here that you've emailed him the day before about a meeting on site. Do you think, looking at this now, that you may have been mistaken that it was at your offices and that, in fact, it was at site?
I thought there were 2 different days, sorry. I remember meeting Jeff. I can't remember meeting him on site. I
Okay.
just don't remember that.
If the meeting was at site, Mr. Blades would have seen, it would have been obvious, wouldn't it, that Grenfell Tower was a building over 18 metres high?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any memory of any discussion with Mr. Blades around the 11th of April 2012 about the performance of cladding in fire? Was that discussed at all at this early stage with him?
Not to my recollection, no.
Okay. Now, after the meeting with Mr. Blades, there was a design team meeting number 1 on the 19th of April 2012. For the transcript, the notes of that are at TMO 1001143, and we don't need to turn that up, but following that meeting you wrote to the TMO. I want to look at that. This is at SEA 404051. Now this is an email dated the 20th of April 2012 to Mr. Anderson of the TMO, and I want to focus on what's said in the second paragraph about the cladding. There you say, so just to put this in context, you seem to be talking about engagement with the planners that had run on till 2 p.m. That's in the first part of that first paragraph. And then you say this, the comments on the appearance, in the second paragraph you say this, the comments on the appearance of the tower were limited, but both Ed and James were uncomfortable with the suggestion of aluminium cladding. Plastic and Croydon were the words used, and a render system would be their first preference, with a request to consider leaving concrete columns exposed. And then you've got, this is likely to be problematic. They sound very amenable to meeting when we're ready. The pre-application charge is no longer an issue, any on calc, but they were not sure about Grenfell. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you about those comments about how uncomfortable planning were at this stage about the suggestion of aluminium cladding. Did you take it from the meeting you'd had that ACM would be unlikely to get through the planning process?
They don't mention ACM, and I wouldn't have automatically inferred ACM from that comment.
I see. So you're saying that what had been suggested was just aluminium cladding, is that right?
In fact, I would even go so far as to say the emphasis on the materiality is maybe not fully what they were communicating. They were communicating a plastic effect that a flush block can achieve if it's all covered in a panel, a seamless, featureless panel system. And I think that's where they refer to it as plastic. It looks like a plastic box.
I see. So
I don't think that that's possibly at this point when we're talking in such general terms. I don't think because they did eventually agree to aluminium. I don't think it was the material itself that they were objecting to.
Yeah, it was just the concept of having a metal
featureless block.
Yeah. So, was the planner's concern based on appearance?
Yes.
Yeah. Did anybody at this early stage raise any concern about fire performance?
You wouldn't expect. Well, that is obviously handled by building control, not by planning.
Yeah. And we see from the rest of the second paragraph of the email that the planners also suggested a render system as their first preference. Can you just explain to us so people understand what is a render system?
It's quite complicated.
Is it effectively kind of sticking material to the existing concrete, kind of plastering material onto it, a substance onto it?
For this application, you would be looking at an insulated render system, of which there are numerous on the market, some of which apply a reinforcement mesh directly to the insulation and then build up a sometimes very thin layer of, we'll call it render, plaster, on top of it. Because it's very thin, it invariably involves a lot of polymers. It's a reinforced polymeric of some sort. And they get more involved with backing boards and cavities.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they're on a troweled-on surface.
Yeah. Can you just explain briefly why that wasn't pursued? Why was that not really thought about any further?
I think it comes up in conversations later, but any render, even a polymeric type, which you wouldn't expect to repaint, builds up, can pick up a lot of dirt, and invariably can crack at corners, at junctions, and needs to be repaired and cleaned frequently for it not to look very unsightly.
Yeah.
So I think over the lifespan of the planning application, the idea of a render fell away for those reasons.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that at this stage, the selection of materials for the cladding was largely driven by aesthetic considerations, that was uppermost in people's mind?
Yes.
Now, can we look at paragraph 111 of your witness statement? This is at SEA 30144273 at page 52. I just want us to read that together. You say, on the 27th of July, Paul Dunkerton of the TMO emailed me and asked for information for the residents' newsletter regarding the proposals. The same day, Blaine Cagney emailed him attaching images for the newsletter, including one for the VMZ composite, which said it had a polyethylene core FR fire retardancy. I recall that we were still researching cladding options at this stage. I note that in an August 2012 version of the KCTMO project newsletter, the cladding with the most favourable reception from the residents' consultation was a zinc cladding system, illustrated as VMZ composite, with a polyethylene core FR fire retardancy. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, again, on a separate topic, I'm going to come to the question of resident consultation and what the residents were shown in terms of different cladding options. But I just sticking with the theme of ACM, there you refer to Mr. Cagney sending Mr. Dunkerton images of potential cladding panels. Can we just look at that information that was sent by Mr. Cagney? It's at SEA 405330. And this is for the VM Zinc composite panel. And we can see it said there that in the top middle of the page that VMZ composite is a system made up of 2 sheets of zinc and a high-density mineral-rich core, combining the qualities of the zinc with the rigidity and flatness of composite. This combination offers unique architectural possibilities for facades on new or renovated buildings. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And on the right, there's a little diagram, and the label at 2 says polyethylene core FR brackets fire retardancy. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did you know what polyethylene was at the time?
Not more than that it was a plastic.
Did you know anything about its fire performance?
No.
Did you understand what these references to FR fire retardancy meant at the time in terms of fire performance?
If I had not seen the fire retardancy appended, I would have just said fire rated. I would have just read it as meaning fire rated.
Do you remember noticing at the time that it said FR fire retardancy in relation to this product?
I can't remember the circumstances where I asked Blaine to send this, but I don't think I looked at it.
Okay. And there's the words in the middle, which we read as well, saying a high-density mineral-rich core. Does it follow from your answers that you didn't think about that phrase either in terms of what it might mean in
No.
terms of fire performance? When you sent this sheet, had you or anyone else at Studio E, as far as you were aware, investigated whether these VM Zinc composite panels would comply with the building regulations and the guidance in approved document B for buildings over 18 metres?
No, at this stage we were just researching options.
Yeah. Was there any particular reason why this panel sheet for this VMZ composite was sent to Mr. Dunkerton of the TMO? Can you remember what the rationale was for singling out this product and sending the detail to him?
I know that, well, I don't know, but I can't remember. I haven't tried to piece this bit back together in my mind, but I know that we had a public engagement or resident consultation
Yeah,
around this date,
yeah,
and I believe we presented several options
Yeah.
on the boards. I don't think at that stage we had samples. And I think that the request to put something in the newsletter came out of that evening event,
yeah.
and I think that's where
That came from.
Came from.
Okay. Did you give any consideration at this stage to using a panel with an FR fire retardancy core?
No.
Did you think to check with Exova whether this type of panel would be appropriate for use on the Grenfell project?
No.
Now, we know this was not the main panel that you ended up including in the for the main part of the MBS specification. We'll come to that in due course when we look at the Proteus honeycomb panel. Can we now go to SEA 405597? And if we can blow that up, we can see from this that it's on the 7th of August, and it's you emailing Mr. Anderson and Mr. Dunkerton of the TMO, copying in a number of others, including some at Max Fordham, about the project. And it appears to be about a meeting that you've had with the planners that morning. You say Mark and I had a positive meeting with Edward George this morning. Now, Edward George was one of the RBKC planners, wasn't he?
Yes.
And you say in the second line, he was comfortable with the zinc, agreeing the joints on the triangle pilasters could be accentuated. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, when you said there he was comfortable with the zinc, what exactly did you mean? Did you mean he was comfortable with the aesthetic look of zinc?
Yes. the appearance. That's
Yeah.
when discussing elevations, that's not the only thing that planners look at, but that's in this context what he was looking at.
Yeah. So it was that made him comfortable, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, can we turn on to your statement at paragraph 114? This is SEA 14273 at page 53. There, you're dealing with the email of the 7th of August 2012, which we've just looked at. And I want to focus on the last two sentences in the last 5 lines. You say, in terms of building control compliance, this is 5 lines up from the bottom. In terms of building control compliance, at this stage, I don't believe anyone then would have highlighted this of being of particular relevance to cladding selection. We all believed we were choosing cladding products that had been used many times before. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I want to ask you about that last phrase. So just to be clear, by August 2012, you've not yourself investigated whether the panels you were considering complied with the building regulations?
No.
And I think we established this earlier in your evidence, that you've made an assumption that they must be compliant because they've been used on other projects. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree, though, that you didn't know the specific context in which such materials had been used on other projects? You didn't have full details of other projects at this time, so you wouldn't know the full context in which those panels have been used. Now, if we can go on to look at paragraph 136.6 of your statement, that's on page 65. Now, there, you go on to talk about a meeting on the 16th of October in 2012 at your offices where CEP introduced Studio E to Debbie French. You just read this paragraph. You say, on the 9th of October 2012, Jeff Blades, CEP, emailed me regarding a meeting to discuss the rain screen materials. I have no record of why he called me, but my recollection is that he thought we may be interested in a zinc composite panel that Rainabond offered. I recall that I met Jeff and Debbie French of Rainabond, and our office calendar records it as having happened on the 16th of October 2012 at Studio E LLP's office. And then you say, while I do not recall much of the detail of the meeting, in these sort of product representative meetings, usually I would have talked them through the drawings, and then they would discuss finishes, sizes, fixings, and details. My recollection is that Jeff and or Debbie brought product samples to the meeting, including, I think, a paint effect, zinc ACM, amongst other metal effects Rainabond offered. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then a little bit further on in that paragraph, you say, I do not recall CEP or Rainabond discussing the plastic core of the panels, nor providing any recommendations for buildings over 18 metres in height. Rainabond's name would continue to come up in the next stage in conversations with the contractors. However, we never approached them directly for advice, nor Alucabond, who I'd been aware of since I was a student. So we have all that.
Did you, I think it was September last year, we came across in our office some of the material that we gathered from...
Yes, and I think you sent that to the inquiry at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
You have seen that?
I believe we've seen that. I'll double check, but I think we have seen that. So you've helpfully explained the meeting here. In your experience, is it common for a supplier, that was CEP, to broker a meeting between a particular manufacturer and an architect? Does that occur frequently on projects?
I'm sorry, I think this was an unusual meeting, yes, I agree, but I wouldn't have thought anything untoward about it.
No, I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward. I'm just asking you how common it was that a supplier like CEP would would set up a meeting with a particular manufacturer. Did that strike you as unusual at the time?
Not really unusual. It was. I mean, it was an unusual meeting, yes, because but it also was logical because he knew we were interested in zinc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reinebond had this paint effect zinc.
Yeah. When you say it was an unusual meeting, why do you say that?
Well, I think he approached us rather than we approached him.
I see.
Specifically on this material choice.
Now, you said there that you don't recall the details of that meeting, but you say it's likely that you talked them through the drawings for the project.
Yeah.
Would that have given an indication of how high the tower was at that meeting? Would you have talked about the fact it was a multiple-storey residential block?
I believe I would have.
Now, you've indicated that the discussion at this meeting was around Reinebond's zinc panels. Do you recall, was anything about costs discussed at this meeting?
I can't remember any specific conversations about cost, but
So you can't recall whether anything might have been said at that meeting about zinc being too expensive in the light of the budget? Did you have any such discussions?
I don't know if it was, as I say, I can't remember any specific discussion about cost, but I think it's understood that an aluminium product would be cheaper than a zinc product.
Okay. You understood that at the time, did
that,
you?
yeah.
Did you understand at the time of this meeting that there was a difference between zinc composite material panels and pure zinc panels?
Yes.
You knew the difference between a composite panel and
Yes.
yeah. Do you know whether aluminium composite panels were mentioned as an alternative at this meeting?
Well, I believe that zinc patina, which I believe there is a sample of in that folder of samples, was an ACM with a zinc effect painted on.
I see. But do you remember discussing that at the meeting, that aluminium was another option other than zinc composite?
Well, we're looking at various options, yes.
Okay. Do you remember any specific discussion about fire safety at this time?
No.
Or about fire performance of particular panels?
No.
Now, I now want to ask you just some questions about value engineering. Just in terms of the overall concept, do you agree that value engineering is the process of trying to find more cost-effective ways of achieving the same outcome or achieving a better outcome for the same cost?
I agree with the first sentence. I think you could have lifted that from my statement. But the second one, yes, I'd agree with that too.
Yeah. In your experience, is value engineering a common process that occurs on construction projects in the UK?
Yes.
Prior to the Grenfell project, had you been involved in value engineering exercises before on other projects?
Yes.
Can we go at this point to SEA, an email that I want to look at, SEA 407413. If we can just blow that up a little bit more. Great. So this is from Alan Dawson of Appleyards or later Artelia, dated the 26th of February 2013, and it's to you and your colleagues at Studio E, and copying in some others, including at the TMO. And the subject is headed Grenfell Tower Regeneration Project Value Engineering. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And it says, gents, as you are aware, there's currently a significant deficit between the approved cost plan budget and the initial figures coming back from Leadbitter, not least of which on the external facade and general fit-out, where we are as much as 483,000 and 1.24 million apart, respectively. And then he says, clearly we have to reconcile, but moreover, bridge this gap as a matter of some urgency. Your urgent assistance in this regard would therefore be appreciated. Can you come back to us with a radical rethink of the scope spec while still meeting the original brief by early part of next week to deliver it within budget? And then he says, if you have any queries as to what's required, please don't hesitate to give any of the team a call. And then he asks for your availability for a meeting. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this was about 11 months approximately before the NBS specification was finalised in January 14. And we can see Mr. Dawson is saying that there's a significant deficit between the approved cost plan and the budget, and between the initial figures coming back from Ledbetter at that stage. Now, we know from your statement that the cost plan had been based on zinc. You've told us that. That's at paragraphs 43.5 and 116 to 119 for the transcript. And it would appear from this email that Ledbetter are quoting 483,000 more for the facade than had been anticipated. Is that right? I think we see that.
That's quoted there, yes.
Yeah, not least of which on the external facade and general fit out, where we are as much as 483k and 1.24 million apart respectively. So I think the external facade is said to be the 483 figure. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you're asked in the second paragraph to undertake a radical rethink of the scope spec. Do you see that there? So this was a significant email to receive, would you agree, in terms of your design of the external wall?
Do I think it's significant?
Because of the word radical rethink of the scope spec.
I think he's out of line, frankly.
Say that again.
I think he's out of line.
Can you explain why you think he's out of line?
He's not the client.
But he's
if it's a radical rethink, it's not value engineering.
I see. Mr. Dawson, so he's Appleyard's Artelia. They are performing the function of employer's agent.
Project manager.
As well as quantity surveyor and, well, you say project manager, but we know that's
I know it's
not
disputed,
agreed.
but I have seen correspondence supporting it.
They're engaged to carry out the employer's agent, CDM coordinator and quantity surveyor roles. So they're coming back to you. Just on your reaction, was your reaction at the time you're out of order for telling us this?
No, it wasn't. I wasn't that strong a response, but I do think to introduce the words radical rethink is completely at odds with value engineering.
I see. Okay. Now, you've replied to that email on the same day. Can we look at that now? Can we go to that SEA 407414? So we see on the 26th of February, you go back to him and others, and you say, Alan, it is not really possible to undertake a radical rethink without sight of the figures, a discussion with the client, and the involvement with the services engineer, who is not copied into your email. Is the M&E not under review as well? And then you say what you think the obvious targets for savings are. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you say in that second subparagraph, you've got change zinc cladding material to something cheaper. I think planning will need a sweetener to swallow this, perhaps copper, ceramic, terracotta, or more glass at low level. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you also say there, just to pick it up now, you say scale back crown. This will also be planning sensitive. Do you see that in the next subparagraph?
Yes.
Did you have aluminium also in mind when you wrote this email, as in aluminium composite material as a potential cheaper option that you might be able to change to?
I was certainly aware of it at that point, yes.
And would that have been based on your meeting and discussions with CEP and Arconic, Deborah French?
Yes. Not exclusively, but yes.
What else would it have been based on? You say not exclusively.
Well, we did a lot of research in the early months of the project, so we met with Rhinobond, but I was very aware of Alucobond.
Yeah. And you were aware that that was going to be a cheaper option than the zinc option?
I think I would have known it would have been cheaper, yes.
Yeah. Now, you say in your email that you had concerns that planning were likely to need a sweetener to swallow this. What did you mean by that?
By taking away the natural finish of a zinc product, they may want to have it compensated somehow. In other words, that's in one way me anticipating a possible conversation or dialogue with planning.
What kind of compensation were you thinking that they might?
Perhaps some high quality materials at low level.
I see, yeah. Now, you then say in your witness statement that you met with CEP to discuss value engineering options on the 4th of March 2013. We can see that if we look at paragraph 190 of your statement. This is SEA 30s 14273 at page 85. So you say on the 4th of March 2013, CEP came into Studio E to discuss the cheaper ACM cladding option and various other value engineering options. Do you see that there?
Yep.
Now, who first raised the possibility of ACM as a subject to discuss with CEP? Was it you or them? Can you recall?
I'm afraid those two lines, to give it context, all I can say is it was March 2013 and we were in a hiatus. I'm not really working on the project. The project was the negotiations with Leadbitter hadn't really come to anything yet. I can't remember the context.
Okay. At that meeting, did CEP express a preference for ACM in terms of final product selection?
I'm sorry, I can't remember that.
You can't remember?
At this point, on just those two lines, and I know it's my witness statement, I can't recall the meeting.
No, if you can't recall, you can't recall. I just wanted to know whether you could recall anything more about what was discussed at that meeting. Did you think at this time about getting some independent advice on whether ACM was an appropriate material to use, for example, from Exova?
No.
Were you aware that CEP might have a preference for particular products and might be keen for you to use those particular products?
Well, they didn't disclose any preference.
So you didn't have any concern at the time that by speaking to CEP about it, you might only be being recommended certain products?
When we first approached CEP, we looked at some very diverse products. One of them was a sort of stone chip product. So the fact that they referred us to Rhinobond, to me, wasn't significant. I understood ACM was a fairly generic product.
Okay. You then report back to Artelia that you're considering a number of options. Can we just look at that and then we can break for lunch? So this is a SEA 407442. So this is an email from you, again, to Mr. Dawson. And what I want to do is focus on the fourth bullet in the middle of the page, where you say, we've had CEP come in today to discuss the cheaper ACM cladding option and they will be forwarding samples for possible presentation to planning. From our conversation with CEP, we feel there might be scope to switch from zinc, but it will require a bit more elaboration than the Leadbetter's figure allows. We note that Leadbetter don't appear to have costed the zinc and have put in a budget figure only. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then in the next bullet, you deal with insulated render, and you say an insulated render is an option for cladding the tower. It's not clear from the schedule whether this is cheaper than ACM. It is less desirable from a maintenance and lifespan point of view. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I think you explained that. Was that because of the concerns you explained to us earlier?
Yes.
Yeah. And in the next paragraph, you also say that you're looking at a Marley Natura as a cladding option as well. Do you
Yes.
see that? Can you explain what cladding option that was?
Marley is a cement board.
Right. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment.
Yes?
If we could pause there, because then I'm carrying on, but it's a good moment.
Right, thank you. Well, we'll have a break now, Mr. Soames, so everyone can have some lunch. Please remember not to talk to anyone at all about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. All right? Thank you. Let's go with the usher. Good. 2 o'clock,
Thank you.
please. Thank you.